Okay, you heard here before that the squat is the king of all exercises. You might have heard some hardcore bodybuilders say, oh, you know, you're not working out until you're squatting. And although that might be true, that can be argued. What we're going to cover right now, if in fact the squat is the king of all exercises, the deadlift is the queen of all exercises. Because this exercise is extremely difficult to master. It takes more coordination to get this movement down right. And you're not going to be using substantial amount of weight unless you first learn to perform this and execute it correctly. So what we need here is to not only fire the right muscles, but fire them in the right sequence. And that's very important in this exercise. So to cover a little bit of the movement here and the exercises involved, we first start obviously with the calves. The calves have to be strong, they have to support the knees, and then very, very important, hamstring involvement. The hamstrings have to be able to get you out of the bottom, as well as the glutes. So it's a glute and ham movement to a large degree. But then also the quads have to, you have to use your quads to press against the floor. And this is one thing I want you to remember when performing this exercise is split the floor with your feet. So that means you're pushing away from the floor and wedging yourself in between the bar and the floor. If you think of that, that's 50% of the technique. So think of, again, pushing off the floor and wedging your body in between the bar and the floor. Then, as we're moving up, the erectors of the lower back have to hold an isometric contraction. What that means is a contraction where there is no movement. It's like holding your arm out for 5 minutes. And how long can you do that before you really start to tire and the muscles in your shoulders start to burn? That's exactly what's happening here in a smaller degree. The lower back is not actively moving, it's holding the whole body in place. And that's a common misconception where the deadlift is a movement specifically for the lower back. That's not true. If performed correctly, the deadlift is a movement that initiates an isometric contraction of the lower back. And then getting into some of the upper back, you have the scapula, which in the bottom position is going to be spread. And as you come up, you're retracting the scapula and bringing your shoulders back. That involves muscles that attach to the scapula, like the rhomboids. The traps come into play here, obviously, in holding the weight. And then the rear delts as you pull your shoulders back. So, as you can see, this is a movement that goes from your calves all the way up to your traps, to the muscles in your neck. This is a very complete movement. One thing I failed to mention here is that the lats, the involvement of the lats. A lot of times we think of doing pull-ups and pull-downs on a cable machine as the only exercise that really targets the lats, but actually, depending on where you grip the bar and the wider you go, the more the lats come into play in the deadlift. So I would advise you to think about the lats as you're pulling up, because the lats are responsible for that movement in the shoulders, bringing the shoulders back into a lockout position in this movement. So I think I've talked enough about this. Let's see how this plays out. All right, all right. So he's in bottom position. The back is as straight as possible. You notice what I mentioned before, the scapula is spread out. That means if it's spread out, that it has to come back to the middle. And that tells us that there's some muscle contraction there. And there's a lot of involvement of those muscles in retracting the scapula. So you also notice that he's facing forward. He's not looking down. See, if he looks down, then he's going to start to bend in the back. And that's going to mean a vulnerable back. So we don't want that. So again, you notice that he's in the bottom position. The quads are ready to go. The hand grip is right outside of the knees. And let's see it. You see the explosion on coming up? He's wedging himself in between the bar and the ground. One more. Perfect. Good. Now, one thing I want to leave you with is this whole idea that you have to lock out and drive yourself back. like this. You don't need to do that. If that makes you feel better at the end of the movement, like you got it, that's great. But don't feel a need to do that. There's no reason to compress the lower back by bringing it all the way back. It doesn't accomplish much. You're not really fighting any resistance there. So it's just like Eric did it. You bring it up, you lock out, you bring the shoulders back. That's more important than rocking back. You drive the shoulders back, the chest is out, and that is the perfect deadlift. You don't want to stop doing this movement if you're doing it, and you definitely want to incorporate this into your back routine or just overall muscle development routines.